What if the price of a crown was a life without love? What if a wedding ring was just another word for a cage? For many powerful women in history, marriage was not about partnership. Political transaction where they were the currency. To marry was to give a foreign prince or a local nobleman a claim to her throne, her country, and her power. It meant risking being overshadowed, controlled, or even disposed of. So what did they do? They chose the crown, they chose power, they chose to rule alone. But what was the cost of that choice? Was it loneliness or was it freedom? Number 17 was a virgin queen, the ultimate political strategy. She survived imprisonment in the Tower of London before she was even queen. She spoke at least 7 languages, including Latin, Greek, French, and Welsh. By the end of her life, she owned over 2,000 elaborate gowns, but it was said she rarely discarded old ones. Elizabeth I of England came to the throne in 1558. She was 25 years old. The country was a mess. It was religiously divided and nearly bankrupt. Everyone, from her advisors to the common people, assumed she would marry quickly. A queen needed a king. That was just how things worked. A husband would provide stability, military leadership, and most importantly, an heir. The pressure was immense. Her council presented her with suitors. There was Philip II of Spain, her former brother-in-law. A marriage to him would have been a powerful Catholic alliance, but Elizabeth was a Protestant, and she had seen how her sister Mary's marriage to Philip had dragged England into Spain's unpopular wars. She politely declined. There were French princes like the Duke of Anjou. An alliance with France could balance Spain's power. But he was Catholic too, and much younger. The English people were not keen on a foreign king, especially a French one. There were also English noblemen. The most famous was her childhood friend, Robert Dudley. She clearly cared for him deeply. But marrying a subject would have caused huge problems. The other nobles would have become jealous and rebellious. It would have created factions and instability at court. So Elizabeth played a brilliant game. For decades, she used the prospect of her marriage as a diplomatic tool. She would hint at the possibility of marrying a Spanish prince to keep Spain happy. Then she would entertain a French proposal to keep France on her side. She dangled the promise of her hand in marriage for years, keeping foreign powers guessing and preventing them from uniting against her. It was a masterful display of political skill. She kept England out of major wars for much of her reign, giving the country time to recover and grow stronger. She created a persona for herself. She was the virgin queen, married to her kingdom and her people. She used this image to build a powerful cult of personality. In her speeches, she presented herself as both a loving mother to her subjects and a strong, decisive ruler. She once told Parliament, "I have already joined myself in marriage to a husband, namely the Kingdom of England." This was not just romantic language. It was a powerful political statement. It meant her loyalty was to England alone, not to a foreign husband or another country's interests. Her unmarried status was her greatest strength. It gave her complete independence. No king could tell her what to do. No foreign power had a claim on her throne through marriage. All decisions were hers. She was in total control. This was almost unheard of for a woman in her time. She oversaw a period of great exploration with figures like Sir Francis Drake circumnavigating the globe. The arts flourished, giving rise to William Shakespeare, and she famously defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588, one of England's greatest military victories. She gave a famous speech to her troops at Tilbury, telling them she had the heart and stomach of a king. She ruled for 44 years. It was an era of relative stability and national pride that became known as the Elizabethan Age. She never named a successor until she was on her deathbed, keeping her power intact until the very end. She chose James VI of Scotland, the son of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. By staying single, Elizabeth I did not just rule. She defined an era. She proved that a queen did not need a king to be strong, successful, or legendary. Number 16. Why would a queen give up her throne for a library? She was crowned at the age of 6. She was often addressed as king to emphasize her power, and her father had ordered she be raised and educated like a boy. She slept as little as 3 or 4 hours a night. spending the rest of her time studying, reading, and ruling. She caused a European scandal by abdicating her throne in 1654. Christina of Sweden was not a typical royal. Her father, the great warrior king Gustavus Adolphus, died in battle when she was a child. He had made sure his daughter would be prepared to rule. She studied politics, philosophy, classics, and multiple languages. She was a brilliant student with an insatiable curiosity. When she came of age at 18, she took control of the government. Like Elizabeth I, the pressure to marry was immediate and intense. The natural choice was her cousin Charles Gustav. A marriage would secure the succession and satisfy the political establishment. But Christina had no interest in marriage. She found the expectations placed on women suffocating. She declared that she was simply not made for marriage. She found court life dull and the duties of a wife and mother unappealing. Her passion was for knowledge, art, and philosophy. She wanted to turn Stockholm into the Athens of the North. She spent a fortune on books, manuscripts, paintings, and sculptures. She invited scholars and artists from all over Europe to her court. The most famous was the French philosopher René Descartes. She would have him come for lessons at 5 a.m., even in the brutal Swedish winters. She was a true intellectual, more interested in debating philosophy than in discussing treaties or grain prices, though she handled those duties as well. But her lavish spending and her focus on culture made the Swedish nobility nervous. They also could not get past her refusal to marry and produce an heir. Her reign was successful in many ways. She helped end the 30 Years' War with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. But she felt constrained by the demands of being a monarch. She wanted freedom. Freedom to study what she wanted, travel where she wanted, and believe what she wanted. So in 1654, at the age of 28, she did the unthinkable. She abdicated the throne. She gave up her crown, her country, and her power. She named her cousin Charles as her successor. Her reasons were complex. She was tired of ruling, but there was another deeper reason. She had secretly decided to convert to Catholicism. This was a shocking act for the ruler of a staunchly Protestant nation like Sweden. It was politically impossible for her to remain queen as a Catholic. After leaving Sweden, she traveled through Europe and eventually settled in Rome. There, she created a new life for herself. She was no longer a ruling queen, but she was still a major figure. She established a huge library and an art collection. She became a celebrated patron of music and theater. She hosted salons where artists, writers, and cardinals gathered. She lived her life on her own terms, free from the constraints of the Swedish court. She never married. She chose a life of the mind over a life on the throne. For Christina, the ultimate power was not ruling a country, but ruling herself. Number 15, could a pharaoh be a woman? She organized one of the most famous trading expeditions in ancient history, a journey to the land of Punt that brought back shiploads of gold, incense, and live myrrh trees. She was one of the most prolific builders in Egyptian history, commissioning hundreds of statues and monuments, including her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. After her death, her successor tried to erase her from history, chiseling her name and image off monuments throughout Egypt. Hatshepsut lived in the 15th century BC. She was the daughter of one pharaoh, Thutmose I, and the wife of another, her half-brother Thutmose II. This was common practice for Egyptian royalty. When her husband died, the heir to the throne was a young boy, her stepson Thutmose III. Hatshepsut was supposed to be the regent, ruling only until the boy was old enough to take over, but Hatshepsut had other plans. For a few years, she ruled as regent, but then she made a bold move. She declared herself pharaoh. This was a radical step. The role of pharaoh was traditionally male. It was a position of immense religious and political authority, and the ideology was deeply masculine. To legitimize her rule, she needed a clever strategy. She claimed that the god Amun-Ra had visited her mother in the form of the pharaoh, and that she was the god's divine daughter, destined to rule. She had this story carved into the walls of her temple. She also began to adopt the symbols of a male pharaoh. In statues and carvings, she was often depicted with a male body, wearing the traditional kilt and the false beard of a king. This was not about denying her gender, it was a political tool. She was showing her people that she possessed all the authority and power of a male pharaoh. She was fitting herself into the existing model of kingship, so her rule would be accepted. Once her position was secure, she ruled for over 20 years. Her reign was not one of military conquest, but of peace, prosperity, and architectural grandeur. She focused on reestablishing trade routes that had been disrupted by earlier conflicts. Her expedition to Punt, likely modern-day Somalia or Eritrea, was a huge success. It brought immense wealth back to Egypt. The carvings of the expedition, showing the ships and the exotic goods they brought back, can still be seen on the walls of her temple. She was a builder on a massive scale. She repaired temples that had been damaged and commissioned new projects up and down the Nile. Her greatest achievement was her mortuary temple, a stunning multi-terrace structure built into a cliff face. It was a masterpiece of ancient architecture. After her husband's death, she never remarried. To do so would have meant giving a man a claim to her throne. She ruled alone as the senior pharaoh, while her stepson Thutmose III grew up. When she died, Thutmose III finally became the sole ruler. About 20 years after her death, a campaign began to erase her memory. Her statues were smashed, her name was removed from king lists, and her images were chiseled away. The reasons are still debated by historians. Perhaps Thutmose III wanted to solidify his own legacy and that of his son by removing the memory of an unconventional female ruler. And for centuries, her name was largely forgotten. It was only in the 19th century that archaeologists began to piece together the story of this remarkable woman who dared to rule as a king. Number 14, what does it take for a woman to start her own dynasty? She was the only woman in China's 4,000-year history to rule in her own right with the title of Empress Regnant, or Huangdi. She created her own secret police to eliminate her rivals, creating a climate of fear among the aristocracy. She promoted Buddhism over Taoism and Confucianism, making it the effective state religion. She established her own dynasty, the Zhou, which briefly interrupted the Tang dynasty. Wu Zetian's story is one of incredible ambition and ruthlessness. She entered the palace of Emperor Taizong as a junior concubine when she was just 14 years old. She was intelligent and beautiful, but she failed to capture the emperor's favor. After he died, she, along with the other childless concubines, was sent to a Buddhist convent to live out her days. But Wu was not one to accept her fate. She had already begun a relationship with the crown prince Li Ji while his father was still alive. When Li Ji became Emperor Gaozong, he brought her back to the palace. Her rise from there was swift and calculated. She outmaneuvered her rivals at court, including the existing Empress Wang. Wu accused the empress of killing her infant daughter. While her involvement is still debated by historians, the result was that Empress Wang was deposed and Wu was made the new empress. As empress, she was not content to be a mere consort. Emperor Gaozong was often in poor health, and Wu began to take a more active role in governing. She was intelligent, decisive, and had a natural talent for politics. She sat behind a screen during court audiences and advised the emperor on all matters of state. She was the real power behind the throne. When Emperor Gaozong died, her sons became emperor one after the other, but they were merely puppets. Wu ruled through them as empress, dowager, and regent. She was not satisfied with this indirect power. She wanted the ultimate authority for herself. She began a campaign to build support for her to take the throne. She used propaganda, claiming that she was the reincarnation of a bodhisattva. She eliminated any opposition, real or perceived, through her network of spies and secret police. Finally, in the year 690, she deposed her own son and declared herself Empress Regnant, the founder of the new Zhou dynasty. She was 67 years old. She ruled for 15 years. Her reign was a complex period. It was a time of political terror for the old aristocratic families, many of whom she had executed or exiled. But for others, it was a time of opportunity. She reformed the civil service examinations, opening them up to men of talent from lower social classes. This weakened the power of the old elites and created a government more loyal to her. She also expanded the empire through successful military campaigns in Central Asia and the Korean Peninsula. She was a capable and effective ruler, even if her methods were brutal. She never remarried after Emperor Gaozong's death. She had lovers, but she never gave any man the official status of a consort or husband who could challenge her authority. She held power absolutely and alone. In her final years, she was old and sick. Her court officials forced her to abdicate in favor of her son, and the Tang dynasty was restored. But she had achieved the impossible. For 15 years, a woman had sat on the dragon throne, not as a wife or a mother, but as the supreme ruler, the son of heaven. Number 13, could a queen's cruelty be a survival tactic? She was a widow by the age of 17. To secure her place on the Russian throne, she agreed to sign a document limiting her powers, which she then publicly tore up a few weeks later. She was known for her cruel and bizarre entertainments, including forcing a prince to marry a maid and spend their wedding night in a life-size palace made of ice. She never remarried and ruled as an absolute autocrat for 10 years. Anna Ivanovna was the niece of Peter the Great. She was not in the direct line of succession and spent most of her early life in relative obscurity. She was married off at 17 to the Duke of Courland, a small duchy in modern-day Latvia, but her husband died of illness just a few weeks after the wedding. Anna was left a teenage widow stuck in a foreign land for nearly 2 decades. In 1730, the young Russian Tsar Peter II died without an heir. The Supreme Privy Council, a group of powerful Russian nobles, saw an opportunity. They decided to offer the throne to Anna, who they thought would be a weak and grateful puppet. They made her sign a set of conditions that would have severely limited her power, turning Russia into a constitutional monarchy controlled by the council. Anna agreed. She came to Moscow and was crowned empress. But the council had misjudged her. Other factions of the nobility, who disliked the council's power grab, encouraged Anna to assert her authority. Just a few weeks after her coronation, in a dramatic public ceremony, Anna tore up the conditions. She declared herself an absolute monarch, just like her uncle Peter the Great. She abolished the Supreme Privy Council and had its most powerful members exiled or executed. Her reign, which lasted from 1730 to 1740, is often remembered for its extravagance and cruelty. She had a deep distrust of the Russian nobility that had tried to control her. She relied heavily on a group of Baltic German advisors, most notably Ernst Johann von Biron. This period became known as the Bironovщина, characterized by high taxes, a powerful secret police, and a lavish court that drained the state's finances. Anna's court was famous for its bizarre and often mean-spirited entertainments. She kept a collection of jesters, dwarfs, and physically disabled people for her amusement. The most infamous event was the Ice Palace. To punish an old prince who had displeased her, she forced him to marry an unattractive Kalmyk-serving woman. She then commissioned a massive palace to be built entirely of ice blocks on the frozen Neva River. It was complete with ice furniture, ice curtains, and even ice cannons that fired. The unfortunate couple was forced to spend their wedding night inside, with guards posted to prevent them from leaving. They only survived because the bride traded a pearl necklace for a sheepskin coat from one of the guards. Despite the dark reputation of her court, her reign did have some achievements. She continued the reforms started by Peter the Great. She founded the Military Cadet Corps, which provided education for the sons of the nobility. She also funded major scientific expeditions like the Great Northern Expedition to map Siberia and the Arctic coast. Anna never remarried. As a young widow, she had learned to be independent and self-reliant. As empress, marriage would have only complicated her position and forced her to share power. She ruled alone, an autocrat with absolute authority. Her reign was a strange and often brutal chapter in Russian history, led by a woman who had been underestimated her whole life and was determined to never be controlled again. Number 12. How did a party-loving princess become a powerful empress? She never officially married and left no legitimate heir, but her reign was known as Russia's A-gay of enlightenment. She owned an estimated 15,000 dresses and thousands of pairs of shoes. She abolished internal customs duties, which helped boost trade and the Russian economy. She founded Moscow State University in 1755, which remains one of Russia's most important institutions. Elizabeth Petrovna, or Yelizaveta, was the daughter of Peter the Great. She was beautiful, charming, and known for her love of parties, dancing, and fashion. For years, she lived in the shadow of other rulers, including her cousin, Anna Ioannovna. She was seen as frivolous and not a serious contender for the throne. But in 1741, she seized her opportunity. With the support of the Preobrazhensky Guards regiment, she staged a bloodless coup and overthrew the infant Tsar Ivan VI. She declared herself Empress of all the Russias. Many people expected her reign to be as frivolous as her personality. They were wrong. While she did maintain a famously lavish court with magnificent balls and masquerades, Elizabeth proved to be a shrewd and effective ruler. She had a good understanding of politics and a talent for choosing capable advisors. One of her first acts was to reverse many of the policies of the previous reign. She reduced the influence of the German advisors who had dominated Empress Anna's court and promoted Russians to positions of power. She had a deep sense of Russian patriotism and worked to strengthen national identity. Her reign saw a great flowering of the arts and sciences. She had a passion for architecture. She commissioned the magnificent Winter Palace in St. Petersburg and the Catherine Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, both designed by her favorite architect, Bartolomeo Rastrelli. These buildings, in their opulent Baroque style, were meant to showcase the wealth and power of the Russian Empire. She also founded the Imperial Academy of Arts. Culture was not just a hobby for her, it was a tool of statecraft. In foreign policy, she was also successful. She guided Russia through the 7 Years' War, a major European conflict. The Russian army performed well, even briefly occupying Berlin, the capital of their enemy, Prussia. She was a determined opponent of Prussia's King Frederick the Great and refused to make peace with him. It was only her sudden death in 1762 that saved Prussia from likely defeat. Elizabeth never married. In her youth, there had been plans for her to marry the French king, Louis V, but they fell through. She had a long-term relationship with a Ukrainian Cossack singer named Alexei Razumovsky. There is a persistent rumor that they married in secret, but no official documents have ever been found. Even if they did, he was never given any official title or political power. He was her companion, not her co-ruler. She kept her public and private lives separate. Her power remained solely hers. Her refusal to make a public, official marriage was a political decision. It meant she never had to share her authority. She was the absolute monarch, the daughter of Peter the Great, and she answered to no one. Her 20-year reign was a period of political stability and cultural achievement, bridging the gap between the reforms of her father and the later golden age of Catherine the Great, who she personally chose to marry her nephew and heir. Elizabeth proved that a love for fashion and parties did not prevent a woman from being a powerful and successful empress. Number 11. Could a mother rule an empire by blinding her own son? She was the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire in her own right, not as a regent. She was so determined to hold on to power that she had her own son, the emperor, arrested and blinded. She was a key figure in the restoration of the veneration of icons, ending the first period of Byzantine iconoclasm. She once tried to arrange a marriage between herself and Charlemagne, the powerful Frankish emperor in the West. Irene of Athens was an orphan from a noble Greek family. She was chosen as the bride for Leo IV, the heir to the Byzantine throne in Constantinople. She became empress consort in 775. When her husband died just 5 years later, her 9-year-old son Constantine VI became emperor. Irene became his regent and the effective ruler of the vast and powerful Eastern Roman Empire. From the beginning, her position was precarious. There were officials and military leaders who believed a woman had no place ruling the empire. Irene had to be ruthless to survive. She put down several plots against her, often orchestrated by her own brothers-in-law. Her most significant policy was on the issue of religious icons. For decades, the empire had been torn apart by iconoclasm, a movement that banned the worship of religious images. The iconoclast image breakers believed it was a form of idolatry. The iconojewels image venerators, like Irene, believed icons were a vital part of Christian worship. Irene carefully planned a church council. In 787, the Second Council of Nicaea met and officially restored the veneration of icons. This was a major theological and political victory for her. It healed a major rift in the church and earned her the support of the clergy and much of the population. As her son, Constantine grew older. He wanted to rule by himself. He resented his mother's control. A power struggle began between mother and son. At first, Constantine managed to push her aside and rule alone, but he proved to be an unpopular and ineffective military leader. Irene saw her chance to return. In 797, she organized a conspiracy against him. Her supporters captured the 27-year-old emperor. On Irene's orders, his eyes were put out. The act was meant to render him ineligible to rule. He died from his injuries shortly after. With her son out of the way, Irene became the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire as Basileus, or emperor, not just as a regent or empress consort. She ruled alone for 5 years. Her position was groundbreaking but also unstable. In the West, Pope Leo III saw the Byzantine throne as vacant because it was held by a woman. In the year 800, he crowned the Frankish king, Charlemagne, as the new emperor of the Romans. This was a direct challenge to Irene's authority and the legitimacy of the Byzantine Empire. To solve this political crisis, a marriage was proposed between Irene and Charlemagne. It would have united the two great Christian empires of Europe. But the plan was deeply unpopular with the officials in Constantinople. They did not want to be ruled by a Frank. In 802, before the marriage could happen, Irene was overthrown in a palace coup led by her own finance minister. She was exiled to the island of Lesbos. She died there less than a year later. Irene's story is a stark example of the brutal politics of the Byzantine court. She was intelligent and politically skilled, but she had to resort to extreme measures to hold on to the power that society believed a woman should not have. Number 10. Can a queen divorce a king and marry his rival? She was married twice, but she was a ruler in her own right long before either husband. Her first marriage was annulled by the church, an incredibly rare event for a royal. The second marriage was a political disaster that she also managed to end. Her reign is considered the golden age of Georgian history. She was officially titled King of Kings and Queen of Queens. Tamar of Georgia lived in the 12th and 13th centuries. She was the daughter of King George III. In a bold move, her father crowned her as his co-ruler while he was still alive. This was to make sure the succession was secure and to get the powerful Georgian nobility used to the idea of a female ruler. When her father died in 1184, Tamar became the sole monarch of the Kingdom of Georgia. The nobles immediately challenged her. They demanded that she dismiss her father's appointed officials and that she marry a husband of their choosing. They wanted a man on the throne they could control. Tamar was forced to compromise on some issues, but she held firm on her right to rule. The pressure to marry was a constant theme. A queen needed a husband to lead the army and produce an heir. Reluctantly, Tamar agreed to marry a man chosen by her court. He was a Russia's prince named Yuri Bogolyubsky. The marriage was a catastrophe. Yuri was a rough soldier and a terrible husband. He was often drunk and treated Tamar cruelly. More importantly, he tried to seize political power for himself. This was something Tamar would not tolerate. After 2.5 years, she did something almost unheard of for a woman of her time, let alone a queen. She divorced him. She accused him of misconduct and had the church council annul the marriage. She then exiled him from Georgia. Yuri did not go quietly. He gathered an army and launched 2 failed rebellions trying to reclaim the throne. But Tamar, with the support of her loyal nobles, defeated him both times. This experience taught her a valuable lesson. She would not let her court choose her husband again. She now needed an heir to secure the dynasty. This time, she chose her own husband. He was David Soslan, a prince from a neighboring kingdom. Their marriage was a political partnership. David was named king consort, but it was made clear that Tamar was the supreme ruler. He was a capable military commander who led the Georgian armies to victory, but he never challenged his wife's authority. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, securing the succession. With her domestic situation settled, Tamar presided over a period of incredible military, political, and cultural expansion. The Georgian army, often led by David Soslan, won major victories against neighboring Muslim states, expanding the kingdom's territory to its greatest extent. Georgia became the most powerful Christian state in the Caucasus region. This was also a time of great cultural flourishing. Monasteries were built, literature thrived, and the famous epic poem The Knight in the Panther's Skin was written during her reign. Tamar ruled for 29 years. She managed the difficult balancing act of being a female monarch in a male-dominated world. She used marriage not as a submission to a man's power, but as a tool to achieve her own political goals. She controlled her marriages. They did not control her. She remains one of the most beloved and revered figures in Georgian history, a symbol of a strong and successful golden age. Number 9, how do you negotiate with a man who thinks he is your superior? She once held a diplomatic meeting with a Portuguese governor who tried to humiliate her by not providing a chair. While he sat on a throne, she calmly ordered one of her male servants to get on his hands and knees, and she sat on his back as if he were a chair, meeting the governor at eye level. She led a war of resistance against the Portuguese for nearly 40 years. She was a master of diplomacy and espionage, creating alliances with other local groups and even with the Dutch. Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba was a 17th century ruler in what is now modern-day Angola. She lived in a time of intense pressure from the Portuguese, who were expanding their colonial presence and their horrific slave trade in the region. Nzinga's first major appearance on the political stage was in 1622. Her brother was the king of Ndongo, and he sent her as his envoy to negotiate a peace treaty with the Portuguese governor in Luanda. This is when the famous incident with the chair occurred. The Portuguese had placed only one chair in the room for their governor, forcing the Ndongo delegation to stand. By creating her own human chair, Nzinga instantly asserted her equality and her refusal to be intimidated. She went on to negotiate a favorable treaty, demonstrating her sharp diplomatic skills. A few years later, her brother died. Nzinga seized power, becoming queen. The Portuguese refused to recognize her as a legitimate ruler and intensified their attacks. This began a decades-long war. Nzinga was not just a diplomat, she was a brilliant military strategist. She led her armies in person, fighting a guerrilla war against a technologically superior enemy. To survive, she had to be adaptable. She formed a new state at Matamba, a region that was easier to defend. She welcomed runaway slaves and others fleeing the Portuguese, building up her military strength. She was a master of creating alliances. She understood the European rivalries and made a strategic alliance with the Dutch, who were competing with the Portuguese for control of the Atlantic trade. Her personal life was entirely subordinated to her political and military goals. She never married in a conventional way that would have required her to cede power to a man. She took numerous male consorts who were sometimes referred to as her husbands, but they held no political power. She was the absolute ruler, right? In a fascinating move to solidify her authority, she often dressed in men's clothing and presented herself as a king rather than a queen. She wanted to be seen as a ruler and a warrior, roles that were exclusively male in her culture. Her resistance against the Portuguese lasted until her death in 1663, when she was in her early 80s. She had fought them for almost 40 years. While she never completely drove the Portuguese out, her relentless opposition severely limited their expansion and their ability to capture slaves from the interior. She negotiated another peace treaty with the Portuguese in her later years, finally gaining the recognition of her as the ruler of Matamba. Nzinga is remembered as a powerful symbol of resistance against colonialism. She was a shrewd diplomat, a skilled military leader, and a ruler who used every tool at her disposal to protect her people and her land. She never let gender or the expectations of others define her or limit her power. Number 8, was this queen a tyrant or a patriot? She ruled Madagascar for 33 years, a reign known for its brutal policies of isolationism and self-sufficiency. Under her rule, the number of Europeans on the island was reduced from over 100 to just a handful. She revived local customs and traditions, including the Tanjana ordeal, a trial by poison that is estimated to have killed thousands of people a year. She successfully repelled a military attack by a combined British and French force. Rana Valona, I became the Queen of Madagascar in 1828. She was not in the direct royal line, but she was one of the wives of the previous king. Radama I Radama had been a modernizer who welcomed European missionaries, traders, and advisors. When he died, there was a power struggle. Ranavalona, with the support of the traditionalist faction at court, seized the throne. Her main goal was to reverse the policies of her late husband. She believed that the growing European influence was a threat to Madagascar's sovereignty and culture. She was determined to protect her kingdom from foreign domination. She began a systematic process of kicking out foreigners. She placed severe restrictions on European traders. She banned Christianity, which she saw as a foreign and subversive religion. Missionaries were expelled, and native Christians were persecuted. She also implemented a radical policy of self-sufficiency. Since she was cutting off trade with Europe, Madagascar had to produce everything it needed itself. This led to a huge program of forced labor. Her subjects were conscripted to work in mines, build factories, to produce guns and ammunition, and serve in her massive army. The conditions were often terrible, and many people died. One of the most notorious aspects of her reign was the revival of the Tangina ordeal. This was a traditional form of trial. An accused person was forced to swallow poison from the nut of the Tangina tree. If they vomited up 3 pieces of chicken skin they were also forced to eat, they were declared innocent. If they died or failed to vomit, they were guilty. This was used to root out Christians and other perceived enemies of the state. It was a powerful tool of social and political control. To Europeans at the time, Ranavalona was a bloodthirsty tyrant, a monster. But to many of her own people, she was a patriot and a hero. She was successfully defending their country from the fate that was befalling so much of the rest of Africa and Asia at the hands of European colonial powers. In 1845, a combined British and French naval force attacked the port of Tamatave, trying to force her to reopen trade. Her army fought them off. The heads of the defeated European soldiers were put on pikes along the beach as a warning. Ranavalona ruled as an absolute monarch. She had a husband, a high-ranking military officer, but he was her consort, not her co-ruler. She held all the power. Her long reign was a period of intense hardship for many of her people, but it was also a period where Madagascar maintained its independence against immense foreign pressure. When she died in 1861, she left behind a strong, centralized state that was able to resist French colonization for another 30 years, largely because of the military and industrial base she had built. Her legacy is complex and controversial, but she was without a doubt a powerful and determined ruler. Number 7, how did a one-eyed queen challenge the Roman Empire? She led her armies from the front line, fighting alongside her soldiers. She lost an eye in battle against the Romans. She successfully captured several major Roman cities in Egypt, a province vital for its grain supply. The Roman Emperor Augustus treated her with respect, referring to her as that woman, but also signing a peace treaty with her kingdom that was surprisingly favorable to her people. Amanirenas was a Kandake, or queen, of the Kingdom of Kush, a powerful civilization centered in what is now modern-day Sudan. She ruled during the late 1st century BC. This was a time when the new Roman Empire, under its first emperor, Augustus, was expanding its territory. In 24 BC, the Romans conquered Egypt, which bordered Kush to the north. The Roman governor of Egypt then tried to impose a tax on the Kushites. Amanirenas was not about to let her kingdom become a subject of Rome. She decided to strike first. She led a Kushite army north into Roman Egypt. Her attack was a stunning success. They captured the important cities of Aswan and Philae. As a final act of defiance, her soldiers looted a statue of Emperor Augustus and took the bronze head back to their capital, Meroe. There, they buried it under the steps of a temple dedicated to victory, so that everyone who entered would be symbolically treading on the head of the Roman emperor. The Romans were shocked and furious. They sent an army of 10,000 men under a new governor, Gaius Petronius, to retaliate. The Romans marched south, pushing the Kushite forces back and even sacking one of their cities. It was during this fierce fighting that Queen Amanirenas lost an eye. But she and her army were not defeated. They regrouped and continued to fight. What happened next is a testament to Amanirenas' skill as both a warrior and a diplomat. The war dragged on for 3 years. The Romans realized that a long-term war in this difficult territory against such a determined enemy would be costly and difficult. Amanirenas sent envoys to negotiate a peace settlement. The final treaty, signed in 21 BC, was a remarkable victory for Kush. The Romans agreed to withdraw from all the Kushite territory they had occupied. They established a new permanent border further north, and most importantly, they canceled the tax they had tried to impose. Amanirenas had faced down the most powerful empire in the world and won. She had protected her kingdom's sovereignty and its economic interests. The story of Amanirenas is a powerful one. She was a warrior queen who was not afraid to take on a superpower. The fact that the Romans signed such a favorable treaty shows the level of respect she had earned from them. She ruled not as a consort or a regent, but as the sole leader of her people. The buried head of Augustus, which was rediscovered by archaeologists in 1912, remains a potent artifact of her successful defiance. Number 6, could a desert city become the capital of an empire? She claimed to be a descendant of Cleopatra. She was fluent in multiple languages, including Greek, Aramaic, and Egyptian. She created an empire that, at its height, stretched from modern-day Turkey to Egypt. The Roman Emperor Aurelian had to launch a full-scale military campaign to defeat her. Zenobia was the queen of Palmyra, a wealthy caravan city in the Syrian desert, during the 3rd century AD. This was a period of crisis for the Roman Empire. It was politically unstable and under attack from enemies on its borders. Palmyra was technically a client state of Rome, but it had a great deal of autonomy. Zenobia was the wife of the city's ruler, Odenathus. He was a loyal ally of Rome and was given significant military authority in the east. He was assassinated in 267 AD, along with his eldest son. Zenobia's young son, Vabaliathus, inherited the throne. Zenobia became his regent. But, like many powerful regents, she was the true ruler. Zenobia was ambitious. She was not content to simply rule Palmyra on behalf of Rome. She saw the weakness of the Roman Empire as an opportunity. She began to expand her territory. In 270, she launched a full-scale invasion of the Roman province of Egypt. Her army quickly conquered this vital region, cutting off Rome's main supply of grain. She then expanded her control north into Anatolia, modern Turkey. She had created a massive breakaway empire, the Palmyrene Empire, right in the middle of Roman territory. She was a highly cultured and intelligent ruler. Her court was a center of learning, attracting scholars and philosophers. She was known for her tolerance of different religious groups. On her coins, she initially styled her son as a king subordinate to the Roman emperor. But soon she grew bolder. She began issuing coins that declared both herself and her son as Augusta and Augustus, the titles of Roman emperors and empresses. This was a direct declaration of independence and a challenge to Roman authority. The Romans could not ignore this. In 272, the determined Roman Emperor Aurelian marched east with a large army. He defeated Zenobia's forces in 2 major battles. He then laid siege to the city of Palmyra itself. Zenobia tried to escape to seek help from the Persians, Rome's great rival, but she was captured by Roman cavalry. Palmyra surrendered. Aurelian took Zenobia back to Rome. Instead of executing her, as was common for defeated enemies, he paraded her through the streets in his triumphal procession. She was said to have been bound in golden chains. After the triumph, her fate is uncertain. Some sources say she was given a villa in Tivoli, where she lived out her life as a Roman socialite, and her daughters married into the Roman nobility. Zenobia's reign was short, but spectacular. For a few brief years, a queen from a desert city ruled a vast empire and challenged the might of Rome itself. She ruled alone, as regent for her son, and never allowed another man to share her power. She remains a figure of fascination, a powerful woman who dared to carve out her own empire. Number 5, how did an unkinglike lady save England? She was never called a queen, but she ruled the western half of Anglo-Saxon England for 8 years. She was a brilliant military strategist who devised a system of fortified towns, or burhs, that proved crucial in the fight against Viking invaders. She captured the key Viking strongholds of Derby and Leicester, a major turning point in the war. Upon her death, she was not succeeded by a man from her council, but by her daughter, a rare instance of female succession in the Anglo-Saxon period. Aethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, lived at a critical time in English history, the late 9th and early 10th centuries. For decades, Viking armies had been attacking and conquering large parts of England. By the time Aethelflaed was an adult, only her father's kingdom of Wessex in the south and her husband's kingdom of Mercia in the Midlands remained under Anglo-Saxon control. She was the eldest daughter of Alfred the Great, the famous king who saved Wessex from total collapse. Alfred arranged her marriage to Aethelred, the Lord of the Mercians. This was a strategic alliance, uniting the last two Anglo-Saxon kingdoms against their common enemy. Aethelflaed was not just a political bride, she was an active partner in her husband's rule. When her husband's health declined and he eventually died in 911, Aethelflaed did not retire or get pushed aside. The Mercian people accepted her as their ruler. She was given the title Lady of the Mercians. This was a careful choice of words. Calling her a queen might have been seen as a challenge to the authority of her brother, Edward the Elder, who was now the King of Wessex. But in practice, she was the Queen of Mercia in all but name. She proved to be a remarkable leader. She worked in close partnership with her brother, Edward. Together, they launched a coordinated offensive to reclaim the lands conquered by the Vikings, an area known as the Danelaw. While Edward attacked from the south, Aethelflaed pushed from the west. Her greatest contribution was her strategic building program. She understood that to hold territory, you needed to be able to defend it. She established a network of fortified towns, or burhs, across Mercia. These were not just forts, they were protected centers of commerce and administration. They served as a defensive line and as launching points for her attacks. She built burhs at places like Stafford, Warwick, and Chester. She was also a formidable military commander. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a key historical source, speaks of her with great admiration. In 917, she launched a brilliant campaign and captured the major Viking stronghold of Derby. The next year she took Leicester without a fight. The Vikings in the region were so intimidated by her that even the leaders of York, the most powerful Viking kingdom in England, offered her their allegiance. She died in 918 at the height of her power and success. Her plan to retake England from the Vikings was nearly complete. In a highly unusual move, the Mercian Council recognized her daughter, Aelfwine, as her successor. This did not last long. Her brother Edward soon absorbed Mercia into his kingdom of Wessex. But the fact that they even considered another female ruler shows the immense respect Aethelflaed had commanded. She was a key architect of the eventual unification of England, a warrior and a strategist who laid the groundwork for her nephew Aethelstan to become the first king of all England. Number 4, can revenge build a nation? She was buried alive 3 times by a rival tribe, but managed to dig her way out each time. She systematically and brutally avenged the murder of her husband by having the killer scalded to death, buried alive, and massacred. She was the first ruler in the region to convert to Christianity, a move that had profound long-term consequences. She is considered a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Olga of Kiev was a ruler in the 10th century in the land of the Ruses, a predecessor state to modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Her husband Igor of Kiev was the ruler. In 945, he was murdered by a tribe called the Drevlians because he was trying to collect excessive tribute from them. The Drevlians then made a bold proposal. They sent messengers to Olga suggesting she marry their prince, Mal. They thought that with Igor dead, they could take control of Kiev. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Olga was now the regent for her 3-year-old son, Sviatoslav. She greeted the Drevlian messengers with a show of honor. She told them to wait in their boat, and she would have her people carry them in the boat to her court the next day. The next morning, they were carried in their boat into the city, proud of the honor being shown to them. But they were carried to a deep trench that Olga had ordered dug the night before. They and their boat were thrown into the trench and buried alive. Olga then sent a message to the Drevlians saying she would marry their prince, but first they should send their most distinguished men to escort her. When A delegation of the best Drevlian chieftains arrived. Olga offered them a bathhouse to wash up after their journey. Once they were inside, she had the doors locked and the bathhouse set on fire. All the chieftains were burned to death. Her revenge was not over. She traveled to the Drevlian lands, telling them she was coming to hold a funeral feast for her husband. At the feast, she encouraged the Drevlians to drink. When they were drunk and unarmed, she gave a signal, and her soldiers killed an estimated 5,000 of them. Finally, she led her army to the Drevlians' capital city and laid siege to it. After a year, she offered them a deal. She said she would end the siege if they gave her a small tribute from each house. 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. The Drevlians, relieved at such a small price, quickly agreed. Olga then ordered her soldiers to tie a piece of sulfur-bound cloth to the leg of each bird. At night, they lit the cloths and released the birds. The birds flew back to their nests in the thatched roofs of the city's houses and barns. The entire city went up in flames. As the people fled the burning city, Olga's army captured or killed them. With her husband avenged and her authority brutally established, Olga ruled as regent for many years. She proved to be a capable and wise administrator. She established a system of tribute collection that was fair and systematic to avoid the kind of conflict that had led to her husband's death. She established trading posts and hunting grounds, centralizing the state's power. In the 950s, she traveled to Constantinople and converted to Orthodox Christianity. She was baptized by the Byzantine emperor and the patriarch. She tried to make Christianity the state religion back home, but her son and the pagan nobility resisted. However, her conversion laid the groundwork for her grandson, Vladimir the Great, to officially Christianize the Kievan Ruses a few decades later. Olga never remarried. She ruled alone, a fearsome and effective leader who consolidated power and set her nation on a new historical path. Number 3, could a woman command the Pope? She was a key supporter of the papacy during the investiture controversy, the biggest power struggle in medieval Europe. She personally commanded armies in the field to defend her lands and the Pope's interests. At the height of her power, she controlled a vast territory in northern Italy, including Tuscany, Lombardy, and Emilia-Romagna. She was one of only a handful of medieval women commemorated with a tomb in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Matilda of Tuscany, also known as Matilda of Canossa, was one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages. She lived in the 11th and 12th centuries. She inherited a huge and strategically important domain in northern Italy from her father. This land lay directly between the Papal States to the south and the Holy Roman Empire to the north. This was the era of the investiture controversy. It was a fundamental conflict between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor over who had the right to appoint bishops and other church officials. Was the church independent, or was it under the control of secular rulers? Pope Gregory VII was a fierce reformer who believed in the supremacy of the papacy. The Emperor Henry IV believed it was his right as emperor to control the church in his lands. Matilda was a devoutly religious woman and a staunch ally of Pope Gregory VII. She put her wealth and her military power at his service. Her lands became a crucial buffer zone, protecting the papacy from the emperor's armies. The most famous event of her life took place at her castle of Canossa in the winter of 1077. Emperor Henry IV had been excommunicated by the Pope. This was a devastating political move, as it released all of his subjects from their oaths of loyalty to him. Facing a rebellion from his nobles, Henry had to beg the Pope for forgiveness. He traveled across the Alps in the middle of winter to Matilda's castle, where the Pope was staying. For 3 days, the emperor stood barefoot in the snow outside the castle gates as a penitent, until the Pope finally agreed to see him and lift the excommunication. This event, the Walk to Canossa, was a huge symbolic victory for the papacy, and it happened at Matilda's fortress. She was at the very center of European politics. She was not just a host for these powerful men. She was a military leader in her own right. She frequently led her own troops into battle to defend her territories against the emperor's forces. She was a skilled commander and a determined ruler. Matilda was married twice. Her first marriage was to Godfrey the Hunchback. It was an unhappy, childless marriage, and they lived apart for most of it. After he died, she remained unmarried for many years. Later in life, in her 40s, she agreed to a political marriage to the 17-year-old Welf V of Bavaria. This was an alliance arranged by the Pope to strengthen the anti-imperial coalition. But the marriage was a disaster. It was never consummated and they soon separated. Matilda made it clear that she was the ruler of her lands, not her young husband. She continued to rule her vast territories alone for the rest of her life. She was a patron of the arts and funded the building of many churches and monasteries. When she died, she bequeathed all of her lands to the papacy, though the emperors would continue to dispute this for centuries. Matilda of Tuscany was a formidable figure, a woman who wielded immense military and political power in a man's world, and whose loyalty to the church helped to shape the course of European history. Number 2. How do you rule twice and never marry? She was one of only 8 women to rule as Empress Regnant in the history of Japan. She reigned twice under 2 different names. She was a devout Buddhist and oversaw a massive project to print 1 million prayer charms, or dharani, which were placed in tiny wooden pagodas. Her close relationship with a Buddhist monk led to a major political scandal that nearly put a commoner on the chrysanthemum throne. Empress Koken of Japan ruled during the Nara period in the 8th century. She was the daughter of Emperor Shamu. Her father had no other sons, so he took the unusual step of naming her as the crown princess. She ascended the throne in 749. Her first reign as Empress Koken lasted for 9 years. This was a time when Buddhism was becoming deeply intertwined with the Japanese state. Her father had been a great patron of Buddhism, commissioning the giant bronze Buddha statue Daibutsu at the Todaiji Temple in Nara. Koken continued these policies. She was a devout believer and supported the clergy. In 758, she abdicated the throne in favor of her cousin. It was a common practice for Japanese emperors to abdicate and retire to a Buddhist monastery, but Koken did not fade into the background. She continued to wield significant power from behind the scenes. During this time, she became very close to a Buddhist monk named Dokyo. He gained her trust, and she promoted him to high positions in the government. Her successor, Emperor Junin, and the powerful minister Fujiwara no Nakamaro became alarmed at Dokyo's growing influence. A power struggle erupted. In 764, Koken, with the support of her allies, crushed the forces of Nakamaro and deposed the emperor. She then reascended the throne, this time ruling under the name Empress Shotoku. Her second reign was even more dominated by Buddhism and by the figure of Dokyo. She gave him titles and power that were unprecedented for a monk, making him something like a chief minister or even a Dharma king. This caused a huge scandal among the court aristocracy. Their relationship became so close that Dokyo allegedly tried to become emperor himself. An oracle was produced from a shrine that seemed to support his claim. The court was in an uproar. The empress sent a trusted courtier to the shrine to confirm the oracle. He came back with a new message: only someone of imperial blood could ever rule Japan. The crisis was averted. Dokyo's ambition was checked. Empress Shotoku continued to rule until her death in 770. One of her most famous acts was the Hyakumanto Dharani, the project to print 1 million prayer charms. It was a massive undertaking of printing and woodworking done as an act of piety and to atone for the bloodshed during the rebellion of 764. Many of these tiny pagodas and their printed charms still exist today, making them some of the earliest surviving examples of printing in the world. She never married and had no children. Her choice to remain single was likely a way to avoid the political complications of a husband and the rivalries it would create at court. It allowed her to retain full imperial authority. After her death, the powerful aristocratic families at court reacted against her reign. They exiled Dokyo and decided that women should no longer be allowed to rule. It would be nearly 900 years before another woman sat on the Japanese throne as Empress Regnant. Her dramatic 2-part reign marked a turning point in the relationship between the imperial family, the aristocracy, and the Buddhist clergy in early Japan. Number 1, can you be queen of 2 countries at once? She was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in all of Europe during the High Middle Ages. She was queen consort of France, and then later queen consort of England. She was the mother of 2 English kings, Richard the Lionheart and King John. She participated in the Second Crusade, leading her own vassals from her duchy to the Holy Land. In her later years as a widow, she effectively governed the vast Angevin Empire while her son Richard was away on the Third Crusade and then held captive. Eleanor of Aquitaine was not a queen who never married. She was married twice to two of the most powerful kings in Europe. But her story is essential to understanding queens who wielded power independently. Her power did not come from her husbands. It came from her own inheritance. She was the Duchess of Aquitaine, in her own right, the ruler of a huge and wealthy territory in what is now southwestern France. Her title and her lands were hers, not her husband's. This gave her a level of independence and influence that was almost unique. Her first marriage was to King Louis VII of France. She was 15. The marriage was not a happy one. Louis was pious and quiet. Eleanor was high-spirited, intelligent, and cultured. The court in Paris was grim compared to the vibrant, artistic court she was used to in Aquitaine. She famously accompanied him on the Second Crusade. This was highly unusual for a queen. She brought her own contingent of knights and vassals from Aquitaine. The crusade was a military disaster, and the relationship between Eleanor and Louis soured completely. After 15 years and 2 daughters, but no sons, they had the marriage annulled in 1152. Just 8 weeks later, Eleanor made a brilliant political move. She married Henry, Duke of Normandy. He was 11 years younger than her, ambitious and energetic. 2 years later, he became King Henry II of England. Eleanor was now the Queen of England. Together, they controlled a massive territory that stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees Mountains. This is known as the Angevin Empire. Their marriage was turbulent. They had 8 children, including 5 sons. But Henry was unfaithful and controlling. He wanted to rule her Duchy of Aquitaine himself. Eleanor resisted. She encouraged her sons to rebel against their father in 1173. The revolt failed. Henry's punishment for Eleanor was severe. He had her imprisoned. She spent the next 16 years under house arrest in various castles in England. Her chance for real power came when Henry II died in 1189. Her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, became king. One of his first acts was to release his mother from prison. Richard was a great warrior, but he had little interest in governing England. He spent almost his entire reign away from the country, first on the Third Crusade and then as a prisoner in Germany. During these years, Eleanor, now in her late 60s and 70s, was the effective ruler of the Angevin Empire. She governed England in Richard's name. She put down a rebellion by her youngest son, John. She raised the enormous ransom required to free Richard from captivity, a sum that was 2 to 3 times the annual income of the English crown. She personally traveled to Germany to deliver the ransom and escort her son home. Even after Richard's death and John's ascension to the throne, Eleanor remained a powerful political force. She traveled across Europe, arranging diplomatic marriages for her grandchildren. She commanded armies in her own Duchy of Aquitaine well into her late 70s. She lived to be about 82 years old, an astonishing age for the time. She outlived all but 2 of her children. Eleanor of Aquitaine's life shows how a woman's power could exist separately from her husband. Her authority came from her own inheritance. While her marriages defined certain periods of her life, it was in her widowhood, ruling alone as Queen Mother and Duchess, that she wielded her greatest and most direct power.